Hello, dear viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So I'm outside the former United States Embassy in London. Moved here in 1863, was only here till 1866. So it was a very important center of intrigue during the American Civil War. Like most countries had a civil war, so in this country we're talking about the American one, we say the American Civil War, and then in the United States they simply say the Civil War because it's absolutely obvious which one they're talking about. There's been an English Civil War, an Irish Civil War, and so on. But I mainly want to talk about John Henry Brooks, who lived here during those years, secretary to his father, who was ambassador to the court of St. James at that time, because the official residence of the British royal family is not Buckingham Palace, it's St. James's Palace, a much smaller and humbler palace just across the street from it. Not a lot of people know that. So foreign ambassadors in the UK, they're always called ambassador to the court of St. James officially. Anyhow, so Henry Brooks Adams came from a most distinguished family because his great-great-grandfather was John Adams, his great-grandfather John Quincy Adams. They'd both been president, and then they'd both been ambassador to the court of St. James, as had his grandfather, as had his father. 4 generations of the family held the same job. Perhaps surprisingly, he didn't get the family job. So some very distinguished people held that. Other presidents too. Martin Van Buren, Todd Lincoln, son of Abraham Lincoln, also held the position. Joseph B. Kennedy, and on, because the United Kingdom was still a superpower in the 19th century, so it's quite important. This is also for managing relations with Canada, because it was only 1867 there was Confederation, and Canada became self-governing, but still wasn't conducting its own foreign policy, not really till after the Second World War. Likewise, all the British colonies in the Caribbean, so relations with the United Kingdom really mattered. Anyway, so Adams was born in Boston into this highly political family. They were distinguished on his mother's side as well. They had plenty of family money. He went to Harvard, where he was an outstanding scholar. He then travelled to Germany, attended some lectures at the University of Berlin, but didn't attain a degree there, didn't stay very long. So he's superb at German, French, and I don't know about any other languages. So he came here to help his father, nepotism being widely accepted at the time, but he was clearly capable of performing the job, and he was fascinated by history. So he's also best known as a historian, publishing a 9-volume history of the United States under Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So looking into American history, World War, Revolution, fascinated by British and German history, by Northwest Europe generally, and Anglo-Saxons. He felt people from this corner of Europe, from Great Britain, from Norway, from Germany, and so on, from the Netherlands, that they were the most advanced people, they were the fittest to rule, sort of Darwinian racism, which was quite common at the time. I'm not sure if we, the Irish, got included in this or not, because people who held such views normally thought we're outside the Anglo-Saxon races. We're not really Anglo-Saxon. We've got a bit of Anglo-Saxon blood in us, and sometimes are anti-Catholic. He was a very impressive man, but unfortunately it's all marred by anti-Semitism. He was open in being prejudiced against Jewish people, the Jewish community in the United States being much smaller at that time and only arriving in very significant numbers at the end of the 19th century. So he returned to the United States after his sojourn here, where he'd made many friends in high society and politics, helped persuade people not to be too helpful to the Confederacy, because some Confederate representatives had come to London. Now, the United Kingdom did not extend diplomatic recognition to the Confederate States of America, as the Confederacy was hoping, but they did allow people, the Confederates, to purchase weapons here and indeed kit out a warship. Now, the US government was irate about this. Of course, the United Kingdom could riposte, well, you believe in the right to bear arms. That shall not be abridged. There's nothing about saying, and not if you're a rebel, you can't buy weapons abroad. So anyway, it wasn't the UK government sold the warship, it was a private shipyard. The UK government did nothing to prevent it. Anyway, there were some claims after the American Civil War, which eventually settled by the International Court of Justice in the UK, said, okay, we're in the wrong, they paid compensation, that was that. But the United States was irate that various government ministers had received Confederate representatives, had these unofficial meetings. The Confederacy pinned all their hopes on being recognised by the UK, France and so on, by opening lines of credit, by being able to purchase more arms, and the United States is gradually accepting the CSA as a reality and ending the war. Some sort of compromise rather than outright victory, perhaps. But anyway, it wasn't to be. The idea wasn't as far-fetched as it may now seem. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary were both sympathetic to the Confederate cause, both anti-slavery, but said, well, this isn't about slavery. Lincoln said it's not. He said it's about preserving the Union. Is one area of a country allowed to break away? Well, yeah. Well, what's the American Revolution about? Okay, not exactly a country. Our colonies allowed to break away, part of an empire, and extending this principle of secession to the United States itself. Anyway, Brooks returned to the United States. He became a professor of history at Harvard till he eventually retired at the ripe old age of 39. Wow. Although 39 then was much older than it is today, because life expectancy was much shorter. But he lived on his life as a man of letters. Perhaps surprisingly, he never sought public office. He had 3 very distinguished brothers who made their names in the law and politics, in the army, in the Civil War. So he was married, he had a number of children, but his marriage went awry, and he carried on a steamy correspondence with an unhappily married wealthy lady. I'm not sure if it was ever physically consummated, but he suffered a stroke in 1912. He'd been planning to travel to Europe when he heard the Titanic sank. He was meant to go on the return journey. He was very well travelled in Europe. He'd been on the Grand Tour as a young man. After he graduated from Harvard, the Grand Tour was something like British upper-class boys used to do in the 18th century into the 19th century, which was travelling to France, Italy, sometimes Germany and Switzerland, possibly Greece, maybe even Turkey, not to see any Islamic sites, but Hellenistic ones, ancient Egypt and so on. So he was going to do that. So he was a very erudite man, very cultured chap. Anyway, he died in 1918, having been in declining health for some years, and was no longer such a prodigious writer. He published novels as well. He'd been a New York Times correspondent during the Civil War, but that clearly would conflict with his diplomatic role, so he published his articles anonymously. Anyway, there's a lot of cloak and dagger going on here in London during the American Civil War. You can even take tours relating to it. No one was actually killed here, but the two sides vying for influence within the UK as they were in Canada, France and other places. That's enough for me. Please subscribe to my channel and follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and check out my poetry channel, British Poesy. Right, toodaloo.